Kansas Territory, 1871. The wind moved through the dry grass like it carried secrets, but everyone in the town of Clearwater already knew hers. Calla Hargrove stood alone on the edge of the churchyard, hands folded in front of her faded blue skirt, watching as the last of the townsfolk trickled away. Her sister's voice still echoed in her head, soft and sharp at once. "You're nearly 30, Calla. A widow with 2 children. It is time to stop pretending someone will want you." Calla had not answered. She had only held tighter to her daughter's small hand. It had been 3 years since her husband died in a barn collapse west of town. He had not been a cruel man, just a cold one. His leaving had left her with nothing but a half-broke mule, a tiny cabin on the edge of nowhere, and 2 children to raise, Margie and Milo. She had not cried when they buried him, but she had cried when the bank took the mule. Now, she lived by sewing and cleaning for the preacher's wife. People nodded politely, but she saw the way their eyes slid past her in the mercantile. A woman alone too long became something to pity or something to suspect. "I still believe in love," she had told her neighbor once. "I do not want to be alone forever." The woman had laughed. Not cruelly, just honestly. "You had your chance, Calla. Best let that go." But that chance had never been real. And Calla had not let go. She was gathering her shawl and calling to Margie when she saw him. He was leaning against the water trough near the blacksmith's, a tall cowboy with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low and a dust-worn coat that had seen better years. His boots were caked in mud, and a long scar sliced down the side of his jaw. He looked like the kind of man who had been places no one spoke of. Calla did not know why she looked again, but when she did, he was watching her. Not her children, not the preacher's wife near the chapel steps. Her. He tipped his hat. "Ma'am." She hesitated. "Sir, I'm new to Clearwater," he said, stepping away from the trough. "Name's Hayes Zachary. Looking for work, or maybe just somewhere quiet." "Quiet's all we have," she replied, adjusting Margie's bonnet. "Work's harder to come by." He looked at her kids then, real gentle-like. "Yours?" Calla nodded. "Margie and Milo." "They're 6. Hayes crouched beside Margie, who stared at him with wide eyes, her hands still clasped in Calla's. "You like horses?" he asked. Margie nodded. "I do. I got one that needs brushing, if your mama says it's all right." Calla's chest tightened. "We do not know you." "That's fair," he said, standing again. "I bored him at the livery. Just thought I'd offer." She looked him over. There was something steady about him. Not charming. Not polished. Just solid. "I'll walk with her," she said. Milo tugged at her skirt. "Mama, I want to go too." Hayes smiled at him. "He can come. I got sugar cubes in my saddlebag." The livery was only a short walk, and his horse, a deep brown gelding with a white blaze, was calm and patient as Margie ran her fingers down its side. Hayes did not talk much, but when he did, it was soft and with purpose. "My sister's boy lost his mama young," he said as they watched the children. "Ain't never stopped hurting him. But he got through it." Calla looked at him. "Your sister?" "Gone now. Fever. I took the boy for a while." She nodded. "That was kind of you." He didn't answer, just watched Margie giggle as the gelding snorted against her hair. "People laugh when I say I still want to marry again," Calla said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Hayes looked at her without flinching. "Then they are fools." She blinked. "You do not even know me." "I know what I see. A woman raising 2 kids on her own, standing proud even when folks talk. That's worth more than pretty words." Calla looked away. Her hands trembled slightly. It had been so long since a man had spoken to her like she mattered. "I do not need saving," she said. "I didn't offer to save you," Hayes said. "I offered to know you." That night, as she tucked Margie and Milo into the narrow bed they shared, Calla stood by the window and looked out toward the livery. The moon hung low, and the wind whispered through the cracks in the cabin walls. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe love could come again, not as a duty, but as something real. The next afternoon, Hayes was waiting outside the schoolhouse, his gelding tied to a post. Margie ran to him without hesitation, and Milo followed close behind. "Afternoon," he said to Calla. "You are persistent." "I am," he agreed. "And I mean what I said." She crossed her arms. "Which part?" "That you should try once more. With me." Her throat tightened. Hayes cleared his throat, suddenly unsure. "I got a little ranch land east of here. Not much, but enough. I built it for a family I never found. I think maybe I found them now." Calla looked at her children, at her hands, worn from years of work, at the man who had spoken to her not with pity, but with hope. "All right," she said, voice low. "But you have to prove it." "I will," Hayes said. Every single day. The sun had just cleared the low hills east of Clearwater when Calla stepped outside with a basket of mended shirts to deliver. The air held a warmth that hinted at late spring turning toward summer, and dew still clung to the porch rail. Margie and Milo were inside, finishing their porridge with Mrs. Tilson, the widow from 3 cabins down, who watched them when Calla had errands. She didn't look toward the livery, though she knew he'd likely be there. Instead, she kept her eyes on her path, on the dust where her boots met the earth. It wasn't nerves. Not quite. Just the weight of a step taken in a new direction. The mercantile was quiet when she arrived, just the dry rustle of paper wrapping and the creak of floorboards under the shopkeeper's steps. She left the basket with Mrs. Lantry, who paid her fare and without fuss. Calla didn't linger. As she stepped outside, she nearly walked into Hayes. He held a length of rope coiled over one shoulder and carried a small sack in his free hand. He didn't speak right away, just offered her the sack. "It's not much," he said. "But I figured the children might like something sweet." She hesitated, then opened the cloth flap. Inside were molasses drops, wrapped in waxed paper. "They'll remember this," she said, folding the flap closed again. "I was hoping they would," he said, adjusting the rope. "What's that for?" she asked, nodding to his shoulder. "Fencing. There's a split rail down near my west pasture. Thought I'd patch it today. Could use help, if you're willing." "I don't know a thing about fences," she said, brushing her hand over her skirt. "You know how to hold boards steady?" he asked. "I suppose. Then you know enough." They loaded the boards from the lumber pile behind the blacksmith's and hitched them to his wagon. He drove slow, letting the mules take their time along the narrow track that wound eastward, away from town and deeper into the open land. The house came into view just past a dry creek, a squat structure of hewn logs with a sod roof and a lean-to stable beside it. A garden plot sat to one side, still mostly bare but marked with neat rows of turned soil. A clothesline ran between 2 cottonwoods. "I built it myself," he said as he handed her down. "Took 3 summers, off and on." She stepped onto the packed earth and took in the place, not grand, not new, but solid. The kind of home someone stayed in. "Why here?" she asked, walking beside him toward the broken fence line. "I passed through once before the war. Something about the land stayed with me." "You fought?" He nodded. 8th Kansas. Infantry." She looked at his hands, rough and marked by old burns. "You came back in one piece." "Most of me," he said. "The rest I left in Tennessee." Didn't seem worth asking for it back. They worked side by side, the sun rising slow and steady above them. She held the rails as he nailed them down, sweat beading along his brow. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was always something worth hearing, about a neighbor who bred blue roan mustangs, about the stream he was trying to dam for irrigation, about the way the stars moved differently when you were far from town. "You ever thought about keeping goats?" she asked during a short break. "Goats. They eat almost anything. Easier to manage than cows, less land. Good milk." He wiped his brow with his sleeve. "You know a fair bit about livestock for someone who sews for a living." "My father raised dairy," she said. "Back in Ohio. Before the fever took him." "You miss it?" "Sometimes. Mostly I miss being part of something." He looked at her then, real and quiet. "You could be again, if you wanted." She picked up another rail and didn't answer right away. They finished near dusk, the fence standing straight and strong now, the last nails sunk firm. He offered to drive her back, but she shook her head. "I'd rather walk," she said. "Gives me time to think." He didn't press, just handed her the sack of molasses drops and touched the brim of his hat. "I'll see you again." She met his eyes. "You will." As she walked home, the prairie wind tugged at her hem and the sky turned the color of rust and lavender. The sack felt warm in her hand, and for the first time in years, she let herself hum a little tune, soft and low, beneath her breath. When she reached her cabin, Margie and Milo were already asleep in their shared bed, cheeks sticky with sugar. Mrs. Tilson had left a note on the table, 2 boiled eggs, and half a loaf of cornbread wrapped in a cloth. Calla sat down at the table, lit the stub of a candle, and ran her fingers over the folded paper of the sack. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no either. The next time Hayes came to her door, the sky was dim with morning, and the last frost of spring had melted into the earth. Calla had just finished lacing Margie's boots when she heard his knock 3 even raps, not too soft, not too sure. She opened the door with a hand still dusted in flour from the morning's biscuits. Hayes stood there holding a tin pail and a folded blanket under his arm. "Thought you might come walking," he said. "I brought something to make it worth your while." Calla nodded toward the children. "Mrs. Tilson's on her way. If she comes and I'm gone, she'll raise her voice." "I'll wait with you," he said, stepping back from the door. They sat on the porch rail until the widow arrived, her gray shawl trailing behind her like a second shadow. She greeted Calla with a glance and Hayes with a silence that said she'd be reporting this visit to her church circle before sundown. Once they were clear of the cabin, Calla adjusted her shawl and narrowed her eyes at the pail. "You carrying fish bait or a promise?" "Neither," he said. "Biscuits, dried peaches, and a tin of that coffee you said you missed back in February. Thought we'd eat down by the cottonwoods near the creek bend." She kept her pace beside him, boots brushing soft through the grass. "That's a half-mile out. Most men would have said we could eat on the porch." He looked at her sidelong. "Most men didn't ask you to try again. They found the spot just before the sun cleared the cottonwoods." A flat stone near the water served as their table, and the blanket he brought was thick and clean, if patched in the corners. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to her without ceremony. "Your fence held through last night's storm?" she asked, settling in. He nodded. "Didn't shift a board. That's thanks to you." She took a sip of the coffee, then set the cup down carefully. "Why me, Hayes?" His brow furrowed. "What do you mean? You could have picked someone younger. Or with family. Or land." "I don't bring much to a man except what's already known." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the pail and handed her a folded piece of cloth, a handkerchief, embroidered along the edge with a row of stitched stars. "My sister used to sew like that. She did every corner of our house, even the dish towels. Said a home should feel held." Calla ran her thumb along the stitching. "You kept this." "I kept it because it reminded me what home could feel like. I've been in plenty of houses since, but none that held anything. Yours does. Even just walking past." She looked up. "I don't know how to be loved without earning it, Hayes. I don't know how to rest." "You don't have to rest yet. I just want you to let me walk beside you. One day at a time." She folded the cloth and handed it back. "You're not afraid of what folks say?" "I learned not to bother with people who talk more than they listen. You tell me what you need, and I'll meet you there." She reached for her cup again. "I need to know that if I choose you, my children won't be an afterthought." "You ever seen the inside of my house?" he asked, pouring more coffee into his cup. "No, I built the second room first. Left the main one unfinished for nearly a year. I didn't know who'd live in the rest of the house, but I knew I'd want them to start in comfort." She stared at him. "A man doesn't do that unless he's already waiting for something." "I was," he said. "I just didn't know it was you." The wind shifted then, tugging at the edge of her shawl. She didn't pull it tighter. She let the breeze wrap around her and carry the moment forward. "I don't want a wedding with lace and ribbons," she said. "I want something quiet. Something true. I'll stand beside you in whatever you choose," he said. "Even if it's just the 2 of us and the preacher." She leaned back slightly, eyes on the water. "Milo's been asking questions. He wants to know why a man keeps showing up with candy and rope and smiles." "And what did you tell him?" "That I'm still thinking." Hayes looked toward the creek, his voice steady. "Then I'll keep showing up. Until he's got his answer." She didn't speak again until the sun touched the edge of the bluff and threw gold across the grass. "We'll come by after supper tomorrow," she said. "You can show them the room you built." He stood, folding the blanket, his eyes never leaving her. "I'll have it ready." And when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Calla stood in the doorway of Hayes's cabin as the last of the daylight stretched long over the pasture. Her children had already darted past her, drawn by the promise of something new, a place not cobbled together by loss, but built from the ground up with intention. Margie had gone straight for the window ledge, pressing her fingers to the glass. Milo circled the stove, his eyes wide, brushing his hand over the stone hearth as if testing its truth. Hayes didn't move to guide them. He let them explore at their own pace, his eyes on Calla instead. "You said you'd show them the room," Calla said, voice steady. "I will." Just wanted to see how you'd look standing in the light from that door. She stepped inside, carefully removing her shawl. I didn't come for compliments. I didn't give one. I just told the truth. He led her toward the second room, where a pine bed stood freshly made with a quilt stitched in deep reds and worn blue. Two small trunks sat at the foot, and a shelf along the wall held a few wooden animals carved in rough shapes: a horse, a rabbit, something with antlers. I made those for my nephew, Hayes said. He left them behind when he went to live with his uncle in Missouri. Margie had already climbed onto the bed, her shoes tucked neatly beneath it. Milo stood at the doorway, hesitant. You can sit, Hayes said gently. Or not. It's yours either way. Milo looked at Calla first. She nodded once, and he stepped in. We'd have to bring the quilt my mother left us, Calla said, running her hand along the stitching. It's worn, but Margie won't sleep without it. There's room for every bit of who you are, Hayes said. You don't need to trade anything in. Outside, the wind pressed against the sod roof, soft but constant. Calla turned toward the window. Beyond the fields, the ridge rose dark against the fading sky. She glanced back toward the main room, where the table had been set with 4 tin plates and a pot of beans left warming near the hearth. You planned for us to stay the night, she said, not asking. I planned for you to decide if you wanted to. She walked to the table and ran her fingers along the rim of a plate. It was clean, unchipped, and matched the others. No odd pieces. No signs of a life lived alone. Why now, she asked. You've had the space, the time. What made you ask me? I saw you walking home in the rain last winter, he said. You were carrying your boy and holding your girl's hand, and you didn't look like you needed anything. But I wanted to offer something anyway. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. I've spent years turning down offers that came with conditions. You're the first who didn't demand I be grateful just to be seen. Hayes leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I don't want your gratitude. I want your presence. Your laugh, when it comes. Your opinion, when I make foolish choices. I don't laugh easily, she said. You will. Not because I'll try and coax it, but because you'll forget not to. Margie wandered in, a carved rabbit clutched in her hand. Can we eat here, Mama? Calla looked at her, then at Hayes. Yes, we'll eat here. Hayes didn't smile, but his shoulders eased and he stepped toward the hearth to stir the beans. Milo took a seat beside his sister, still quiet, but no longer guarded. As they passed plates and broke cornbread, Calla listened to the scrape of tin forks and the soft clatter of spoons against enamel. She watched Hayes move between tasks, pouring water, cutting salt pork without ever needing to speak to fill the silence. After the meal, Calla stepped outside to gather her thoughts. The moon was rising, low and gold. She heard the door creak behind her, but didn't turn. I can walk you back, Hayes said. She glanced toward the cabin. They're already asleep. I think they feel safer here than in the place we've lived for years. He didn't approach, just waited. I've never had a man ask what I wanted, she said. Not even when I married. I'm not asking you to rush, just to lean a little closer. She turned, the wind catching the edge of her sleeve. If I say yes, it won't be halfway. I won't live in a house where I feel like a guest. You won't be, he said. You already aren't. She stepped toward him, slow but certain. Then I'll stay? Not for a night. For good. Hayes reached for her hand, and this time, she gave it freely. His palm was calloused, warm, steady. She looked at his face, the line of his scar catching the moonlight. You didn't laugh when I said I still believed in love, she whispered. I'd never laugh at something that true, he said. You just needed a man willing to believe it with you. And with the stars rising behind them, they stood in the quiet together, neither reaching to fill the hush that settled around them, because nothing more needed to be said. The wedding was held beneath the cottonwoods where the creek bent around Hayes's land, the same place they'd shared coffee and quiet truths weeks before. Calla stood in a dress the color of worn linen, her hands folded calmly before her, her hair braided back and pinned, not for show, but because it kept the wind from her eyes. She hadn't invited anyone but the preacher and Mrs. Tilson, who arrived with a parcel of rhubarb pie and a tight-lipped nod of approval. The children stood on either side of Hayes, Margie holding a sprig of wild yarrow and Milo with his shoes dusted from the walk. The vows were short. Hayes's voice didn't waver, even when he looked directly at her and said, I'll be your steadiness, so you don't have to carry everything alone. Calla didn't speak right away. Her eyes were damp, but her voice was clear when she said, "I'll come home to you every day, no matter how the world turns." Afterward, they ate at the small table Hayes had built himself, the children passing slices of pie and whispering secrets between them. Calla set her hand lightly over Hayes's once the plates were cleared, her thumb brushing the edge of his knuckles. He didn't move, just turned his palm upward and let her fingers rest there, warm and steady. That night, after the children were asleep in their room, Calla stepped outside into the hush of the prairie. The moon hung low, and the air smelled faintly of sage. Hayes joined her, bringing a wool blanket to drape over their shoulders as they sat on the porch steps. "I never thought I'd find someone who knew how to be quiet with me," she said softly. "You never needed noise," he answered. "Just someone who didn't run from the stillness." She leaned into him, her head settling against his shoulder. They watched the wind move through the grass, neither needing to fill the silence. Over the weeks that followed, they moved slowly but surely into their new rhythm. Hayes would rise early, tending to the livestock and walking the perimeter of the land before breakfast. Calla took to the garden, coaxing green from dry soil, her hands deep in the earth and her sleeves rolled to the elbow. Margie helped hang the washing, and Milo spent his mornings with Hayes, learning to mend harness leather and check hooves for stone bruises. One afternoon, Calla came in from the yard with dirt on her skirt and a bundle of mint in her fist. Hayes was at the table, carving a small wooden bird, its wings notched with care. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression shifted slightly, as if he'd been waiting just to see her there. "You're carving again," she said, setting the herbs on the table. "I was thinking the shelf in the children's room could use a few more things," he replied. Milo asked if I knew how to make a fox. She poured water into the basin and began washing the dirt from her nails. "Did you tell him you can make anything with time and patience?" "No," Hayes said. "I told him you were the one who taught me that." She turned, drying her hands on the cloth by the stove. "You're getting good at saying things that stop me in my tracks." He stood slowly, walking to her. "I only speak what's true." He reached out and touched her cheek gently. "You changed the way this place breathes. I don't know how I lived here before you." She leaned into his touch. "I wasn't waiting for someone to rescue me, Hayes." "I know," he said. "That's why I came." By autumn, the house had grown fuller in ways that had nothing to do with size. Calla's quilt lay folded over the back of the chair by the hearth. A hand-drawn calendar hung beside the door, marked with planting notes and birthdays. Margie's drawings lined the inside of the pantry door, and Milo had taken to storing his slingshot under the floorboard beside his bed. They hosted Mrs. Tilson for supper once a week, and Hayes mended the fence of a neighbor whose hand had gone stiff with arthritis. Calla took in less sewing work, spending more time in her own garden, trading jars of blackberry preserves for flour and salt. The children walked to school each morning with their hands full of biscuits and their eyes bright. On a cold morning in late November, Calla found Hayes sitting by the fire, the carved fox placed carefully on the mantel. She came to him, slid her arms around his shoulders, and rested her chin atop his head. "You've made a good life here," she whispered. "We have," he said, covering her hand with his. "But it's only just begun." She closed her eyes. "I used to think love was something you either got right the first time or lost for good." He looked up at her. "And now I know it's something you build slow, daily, with both hands and a steady heart." They stayed like that for a long time, the fire popping softly beside them, the walls around them holding warmth instead of silence. Outside, the prairie stretched in every direction, wide and open, but inside, they had everything they needed. They slept that night with the window cracked just enough to let the cold in, the quilt pulled tight around their shoulders. Calla drifted off with her fingers curled into Hayes's shirt, his breath warm against her neck. And when morning came bright, clear, and full of promise, they rose together to meet it.